Good evening, everybody. Hope your week is treating you well. It has definitely been nice to have some of the beautiful weather and, excuse me, all the things going on for the last little bit. And I definitely hope you've been enjoying it. But tonight, as we prepare for all of the storms and everything else making their way through and all the above, we are going to head off into the last part of chapter 2 as it relates to Daniel. And all the visionary things that we expressed and saw last week, we will catch up on and close out at least chapter 2 today. So on the screen there, you have your common image. You might be thinking, well, chapter 2 is over with. Like, why are we still talking about this? Because it will continue to come out into chapter 3. So, with that being the case, just again, something that I want to put before you, but of course, just continue to think through the items that are mentioned on this screen here. But this evening, as we dive off into the rest of and close out chapter 2, I would invite you and encourage you to look at verses 46 through 49 with me as we begin to wrap everything up in chapter 2. In verse 46, he says, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar," following all the stuff that happened with the vision and the dream, it says, "Nebuchadnezzar fell down, paid homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him. The king said to Daniel, 'Your God is indeed God of gods, Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, since you were able to reveal this mystery.' Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many generous gifts. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief governor over all of the wise men of Babylon. And at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to manage the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court." So, thinking through verses 46 and 47 this evening, we start off, "Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell down and paid homage to Daniel and gave orders to present an offering and incense to him." So, it's pretty much self-explanatory, but just to kind of give us an idea of what we're going through and what we're thinking through, in the entire count of chapter 2 here, from Daniel's perspective, the whole entire time, he always referenced or went back to, this is what God has done, this is what God has said, this is what God is conveying to you. And so, definitely, Daniel has gave credit back to God, where credit is obviously warranted and due. And so, to me, that is the amazing side of this. And is even just a point of remembrance that God is at work around us, even whenever we cannot see it, feel it, or hear it. So that's always and should be an encouragement to us. That is the God who fights on our behalf, is the one who is able to work whenever nobody else is able to even see or realize. But remember that a miracle has occurred. Nebuchadnezzar, according to verse 6 there, it says, fell down and paid homage to Daniel and gave orders to present the offering and incense to him. So these things, this is Nebuchadnezzar following up on what is happening and going on. But he says, the king said to Daniel, "Your God is indeed God of gods." There again, capital G to little g, capital L, of Lord there of kings, and revealer of mysteries. And so that, to me, it just shows what exactly is going on and what is running through Nebuchadnezzar's mind. He falls down. He's not worshiping Daniel, but he is rather saying, okay, your God, this Yahweh, who you have, brought before us. There again, Babylonians were polytheistic in their beliefs. This is saying like your God is up here and ours are down here. We want to look towards yours. Or whenever your God speaks, we need to listen. Okay, and so Daniel is officially, as a result of this, he's placed into these prominent roles within the region of Babylon there, or the overall empire of Babylon. And that is crucial. That is very critical for how the rest of the book will begin to unfold. Why? Because Daniel is officially at the king's side for Nebuchadnezzar. Even as we get into Belshazzar, there's some issues there, and Belshazzar struggles a little bit, but nevertheless, as we get to those on into chapters 4 and 5 and kind of there on, we'll discover that part of it. But, at least for this moment, as Daniel is, there again, as we're talking, still a teenager, 18 years old roughly. I mean, this is huge. This is amazing for him to have this kind of placement. But there again, it's not because of what Daniel has done, but who Daniel has entrusted his life to. It's not about what we've done, but who we are entrusting our lives to, following in the footsteps of faith. So he receives this prominent role and given relationship and voice on behalf of God to be able to lead the people. But a lot of people will begin to say, or I've seen this question come through of, did this convert Nebuchadnezzar? Well, I'd love to say yes, but unfortunately no. You would think something like this would be like a aha moment of the light bulb goes on, the big flashing sun says, hey, turn to me, and Nebuchadnezzar says, yes, I've discovered, I've figured out. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So for Nebuchadnezzar, even as what we'll see into chapters 3 and 4, there is some hills apparently he's not willing to die on, and this is one of them whenever it comes to God, that is Yahweh, to which inevitably makes sense why he was the golden head there in that statue vision we talked about last week, because there was destruction coming. There was going to be an issue. There was going to be a problem. While in this moment, all praise is going to God, even to an extent, I think I would say we can be saved, or even to the world, we can praise God for a moment, but it's different praising God for a moment versus a lifetime. Being able to live for God for a second versus to live in His glories and His grace and mercy every day. There are a lot of differences there. So as much as I would like to say, Nebuchadnezzar, turned his life over to God and lived for God, and that was the end of the story, of course, we're only into chapter 2, and we've still got 10 more chapters to go. So either way, you can kind of see for yourself there. But he says in verse 48, then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many generous gifts. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and chief governor over all the wise men of Babylon. So of course Daniel was promoted to chief of Babylon. It was political in nature. It is basically an advisor to Nebuchadnezzar, which was definitely would play a very wonderful role in the chapters moving forward, but administrator to wise men. And I often wonder, how many times chapter 3 is kind of about, the reversal almost of what exactly we're seeing right now. That there's men who go after Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to want to throw them into the fiery furnace. But you would think something like this would almost, encourage other people, hey, there's this solidified answer almost, or there's this continuity that we have found in God. Why don't we serve Him? But instead of serving Him, it's almost as if it was like, you have embarrassed us, and so therefore we're going to attack. Rather than following along and getting in line, they take the opposite approach and they say, no, we're going to dig in our heels and we're going to try this again and we're going to win this time, to which they didn't. But either way, it's amazing the psychology and the mentality behind the way people function and the way their thought process goes. For many, myself included, God began to show me His glory and His goodness, and it was like, hey, I want that. For others, I don't understand why, but they're stubborn. They don't want it. But nevertheless, this of course helps Daniel to begin moving forward into these position of power, or into this position of power. Daniel was showered with gifts there in verse 6 is what it goes back to. Whenever Nebuchadnezzar had made that first proclamation of, I'm not going to tell anybody the dream and they're just going to give it to me. And whenever that happens, if they can tell me what I've dreamed and the answer thereof, basically he's talking about, I'm going to shower them with gifts, put them in positions of power and authority. And so you could definitely see in that side of it, it's the favor of God over Daniel. That is a beautiful thing, that God's favor is upon His people who have called on His name. But you can also sense on the other side, as we were just pretty much talking about, there's this sense of jealousy that can come through that can completely annihilate and disrupt any man or any woman's mindset. It is very crucial there again, what is taking place in this moment, even to the rest of the people, of how did this just happen? What just happened? How can this be real? I've always had my piece of the pie, and now the pie's pretty much ate, and they're saying there's nothing left for me, and it's starting to make them mad. But here we see, the omnipotence of God was on full display. Did Daniel doubt? No. Should we doubt? No. But do we? Yes. That's the problem. That's the issue. We don't always trust in this omnipotence and the omnipotence of God, which is basically, that He is all powerful. We don't think about that as often as we should. We don't meditate on that like we should. But God is always in control. He is all powerful. And then he says in verse 49, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to manage the province of Babylon, but Daniel remained at the king's court. So the appointment of the Hebrew boys to their positions solidified roles and placements in the kingdom. And this especially bodes well for the events that occur in the very next chapter that we'll begin to look at. How amazing and how wonderful it is that literally we're seeing this unfold, not in real time, but in their moments in real time. And it's like you never skip a beat without seeing the hand of God move through it all. But the problem is, do we trust that while God's hand moved for them, He's going to still move for us today? God did. He can. Well, we trust that. As just a closing point of application, just thinking through, as we wrap up chapter 2, I hope this chapter has taught us this, that God is omnipotent, He's all-powerful, He's omniscient, He is all-knowing. I hope that we know He is sovereign, He is in control over all things. I hope we know that God is immutable, that He is unchanging, He stays the same. From as Hebrews 13 tells us, God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I hope that we will take a sense of this and think through that. Was Nebuchadnezzar ever really in control? No. Are the Medes and the Persians, are they really in control? No. None of us are in control of our own destiny and our own future. Whenever it comes down to it, our choices are going to lead us ultimately to the place of where we have to acknowledge and realize that God is on the throne. He is working together all things to the good of those who are called according to His plan and His purpose. He is moving, He is stirring. And we have to realize, God, I'm at Your mercy, I'm at Your will. God is the one who is ultimately moving all things and working all these things towards His good. But we must remember, one day every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. As even we talked about that large stone in the story here of chapter 2 in the vision, God's kingdom is coming. I hope that we believe that. I hope that we trust that. I hope that we have the faith that says, if not in my lifetime, I can't wait for that kingdom to be established. Thinking about that is just, I've had health issues over the last few years that's drove me crazy. I know I'm not the only one. I know there's a lot of us. But think about it. One day in heaven, there's not going to be any more anxiety. There's not going to be any more depression. There's not going to be any heartburn and things after eating spicy chicken. There's not going to be any kind of, heart attacks. There's not going to be any kind of disease. There's not going to be any kind of arthritis. There's not going to be any kind of joint replacements, shoulder replacements, knee replacements, all these things. We're not going to have to worry about any of that. We're not going to have to worry about finances. We're not going to have to worry about food. We're not going to have to worry about wars going on in the Middle East anymore. We're not going to have to worry about whether this one is mad or this one's upset, this one's good, that one's happy. Literally, all across the board. It will be gone, vanished, vanquished, annihilated, done with, over with. I look forward to those days. And it's all in a trust that, honestly put for me, in the 700 prophecies of the Old Testament that have been fulfilled and the several that still relate to the end time events and, the second coming of Christ and all these things, I am left nothing more in a position of saying, God has not failed me yet. There's no reason why I shouldn't trust in God that these things will come to be. They will come to pass. And if that is today, amen. I'm looking forward to spending eternity, with those who are called according to His plan and His purpose. But as well, I would say, If you don't know, it's time you started to reevaluate your life and figure it out, because I'll tell you, there's nothing like it. It really means the world to me and everything, of just to be able to say, God, you've stood by me in the thickest of the worst moments, and you've been on the mountaintop with me whenever I knew that there was a victory that had been declared. If you don't know anything but the valley and the roughest points of life, you need to get with God and let Him show you what a victory and what the mountaintop can look like. I hope this has been a good study so far for you, at least into chapter 2. We'll dive off into chapter 3 next week. But I guess from there, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your week. If you need anything, please let me know. But from there, I guess we'll talk to y'all later. See you guys.